Good morning, everybody, and welcome back. Hope you all had a good break and refreshed your coffee cup for this next session. We've got a wonderful program we're going to be doing now. I've really been looking forward to this update from Ray Martinez. He is the Deputy Commissioner for Academic Affairs and Workforce Education at the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board. Before that, he was the Director of the Independent Colleges and Schools Association. And before that, he worked in the Senate, and that's Ray, is where you and I first met when you were working in Judah Saffarini's office on the Education Committee. And it's always just been a pleasure working with you and getting to know you. Joining Ray today is Dakota Doman, also at the Coordinating Board. He currently serves as the Senior Director for Strategy and Policy. In this role, he assists in leading various agency initiatives pertaining to academic and health affairs, college readiness and student success, digital learning, and workforce education. And I think we could not ask for two people in a better position to give us an update on what's happening at the Coordinating Board, especially with issues related to community colleges. And so what I'd like to do is turn the reins over to y'all. Go ahead and tell us everything you know that we need to know. And then when you're through, if people can just put comments in the chat as we go along after the presentation, we'll go through the Q&A and address those then. So Ray, Dakota, thanks so much for being with us this morning.
Richard, thank you so much. Good morning, everybody. I'm so pleased to be here with you. I know Dakota is equally happy to be here with you, and we're eager to engage in some conversation with you and to share with you some information from the Coordinating Board, particularly as we do have a PowerPoint that I'll share my screen. In fact, I should probably start trying to do that now to make sure that I'm capable of doing it. Let's see. Okay. I think, Dakota, can you give me a thumbs up? You can see the screen okay? Perfect. Great. Okay. Or you can just engage. I guess you can unmute. All right. So again, good morning to everybody. I'm Ray Martinez, as Richard said. I've been around higher education here in Texas for a number of years. I hope that there's probably folks on this call besides Richard and of course Beeman that I'm sure I've met wearing different hats throughout the past 10 or 15 years, however long it's been. I joined the Coordinating Board. Commissioner Harrison Keller started as commissioner actually about 2 years ago now. October of 2019 is when Dr. Keller began as commissioner. I joined his staff as one of his 3 deputy commissioners in February of 2020. So about going on 18 or 19 months. There are days when it feels like 18 or 19 years, but we can save that for a different conversation. It's been a great experience to be here and to have a chance to engage on a number of higher education policy issues and to work with an outstanding team. And Dakota, Dr. Doman is a colleague of mine, as Richard said, our Senior Director for Strategic Initiatives and Policy. And I invited Dakota to join me on this presentation because we're going to take a deeper dive as we go into some of these slides regarding some of the initiatives that are GEAR funded, which of course are the education dollars that come from the federal government for the global pandemic response. We have a number of initiatives that we have started here at the agency. We want to take a deeper dive, and Dakota is very involved in implementing pretty much all of these initiatives that fall under our part of the agency. And we'll tell you exactly how academic affairs and workforce education is situated here at the agency and which divisions comprise that particular area of the agency. So with that, let me jump into the first slide here just to give you an idea. Here, the agenda that we want to cover, we want to talk very briefly about some enrollment trends. We want to talk about population changes. That'll lead us into a discussion about our 60 by 30 TX refresh. Then, like I said, a deeper dive on the initiatives that are GEAR funded here at the agency, and then a few words there at the end on the community college Finance Commission, which is just coming together. I think their first meeting is scheduled to happen imminently. And so again, the PowerPoint is not intended to cover everything. We want to make sure that we go through these slides and leave ample time and opportunity for things that are not on the presentation or things that you want to talk about. We want to hear from you. So we'll leave ample time as we move through our presentation.
Stick or not? Get your stick.
Okay, I think somebody's got their micro or their mute is not on, so I'm hearing somebody talking, which is perfectly fine. I'll talk over folks. Happy to do it, but just want to make sure that folks know that somebody's got their microphone on right now. Okay, so we'll jump into enrollment trends and talk a little bit about some of these specific numbers. And throughout these slides, Dakota will jump in on occasion. We're used to giving presentations together, so there are times when we will toggle between the two of us as we highlight some of the data from these particular slides. And I also have to say, this is the first time that I've ever heard this, but there's a fire alarm going off behind me here on the second floor of our coordinating board building. And the commissioner is down the hall. He wanted me to give you his greetings, and unfortunately, he's engaged in another meeting. So I'm assuming if there's a real fire, somebody will come and knock on my door and get me out of here. But I hope you all don't hear the fire alarm, but there is an alarm going off. So Dakota, I may have to hand off to you a little bit more than we anticipated. Here's the data on enrollment. Obviously, this data is from our accountability system. This particular slide does not include the enrollment data that we do collect for our ICUT members, for the ICUT institutions, the independent colleges and universities across the state, which are private, not-for-profit institutions. But we do collect that enrollment data. It's just not listed on this particular slide. We chose to focus in on enrollment between fall 2019, fall 2020 for our four-year public sector, our public two-year sector, and our HRIs. And as you see from the data, I think you all have probably seen this data. This is certified 2019 and certified 2020. We do have 2021 enrollment data that we're processing now. It's traditional that in the October board meeting is when our data analytics folks will give an update on what the preliminary numbers look like for fall 2021. So we don't have that data on this slide, but I believe we're expected to give our board an update at our next board meeting, which is in a couple of weeks, on what the preliminary enrollment data for fall 2021 looks like. So again, we're comparing 2019 to 2020. And as you can see, I think everybody's pretty much familiar with how these numbers turned out. The sector that had the most significant decline in enrollment obviously is our community, our public two-year colleges across the state, which had an almost 11% decline in enrollment from 2019 to 2020. You all probably have a better idea, anecdotally at least, on how things are looking for your institutions. I've talked to, as I usually do, plenty of institutional leaders off and on throughout the past couple of months, and I've heard a mixed picture, just again, anecdotally, that some institutions continue to see decline. Some of our community colleges continue to see declines in enrollment, where I've heard more positive news from other institutions. So we'll see what the numbers look like when they get reported for 2021 here in the next couple of weeks. The next slide here is what is actual versus expected enrollment. So for this slide, what we've done is look at historical trends. Here's what we would have expected had we not encountered a global health pandemic. And then that's the blue number, the blue bar. And then here's what did happen, obviously primarily because of the situation we find ourselves in. So we would have expected an increase of about 1.7% for our public 4 years. We almost got that despite the health pandemic. The same for our health relateds. We actually got a little bit above what historical trends would have predicted for our HRIs. But overall, for our public two-year institutions, as you can see from this slide, a significant decline, which pushed down the overall enrollment numbers to a decline of about 4.2%. Again, certified numbers for fall 2019 to fall 2020. This next slide shows you that, so it's the same data behind it, but what we put into this slide was to show you the overall enrollment. So as you can see, traditionally our community colleges are the sector of higher ed that enrolls the largest number of students. And that was true in 2019. There was almost a 7% gap in total enrollment between our public 2 years and our public 4-year institutions. 2020 reflects a different picture, where this may be the first time, the 2020 numbers in a long time, that we have near parity in enrollment between our public 4-year institutions and our public 2-year colleges. Again, because of the significant decline that we saw in enrollment for our community colleges across the state from 2019 to 2020. This slide here reflects actual versus expected by various demographics. And as you can see here, we had declines across the board. And for some categories, for many of these demographic categories, we expected to see some declines, but in fact, we got larger than we anticipated. International students is one category. So too is we expected an increase in male students. We got a precipitous decline. And the other one that is sort of highlighted is to the far right of this slide, and that is our older student demographic, 51 plus. We expected a decline, and we got a much greater decline than historical trends would have anticipated. Now, there are all sorts of implications. We can spend a lot of time talking about these enrollment slides and the impact that this has. We don't view this as, oh gosh, look at what's happening to our public 2-year colleges. We understand there's a narrative here that requires our full and complete attention here at the coordinating board. But let's also be realistic. Our community colleges across the state of Texas are the entry point for many of our historically underserved student populations. First gen students of color, low income students, of course, students from rural parts of our state. However you define sort of underserved student populations, your sector is the entry point. And the fact that we've seen such a decline in enrollment for our public 2-year institutions across the state of Texas, it deserves a great deal of attention from this agency, from our elected officials at the Capitol, from all of us, of course. The impact is even more so to these underserved student populations. So when we look at the decline of almost 11% in student population for our community colleges, we have to remember that it is particularly impactful with regard to, again, historically underserved student populations. This is an area that Dakota and I usually will spend a lot of time on talking about. Dakota, I don't know if there's anything in particular you'd want to highlight from, or any takeaways from your perspective from this particular slide. Feel free to jump in if you'd like to amplify anything I've already said, or anything you want to add to that slide.
Yeah, sure, Ray. Thank you so much. And I thought you did a great job of covering this particular slide. And I just want to underscore the fact, of course, that community colleges across the state, really across the nation, of course, do a great job of serving vulnerable populations. And so when we experience a decline in enrollment at our public community colleges, we understand, of course, the population of students who are most likely to be impacted. And that's the population that was alluded to by Ray in terms of first generation students from low socioeconomic backgrounds, rural students, Hispanic students, and Black students as well. And so we as a state will be very interested, of course, in ensuring that we can partner with our community colleges and provide for them the resources that they need to continue to attract and serve and graduate these particular students as well. We're going to talk a little bit more about that in the presentation.
Thank you, Dakota. Appreciate that. And I'll, just as a sidebar as well, I know when I was taking a look at the Washington Post this morning, there was a very insightful article about the now validating what I think we have all been feeling. The data is beginning to validate the unevenness of the economic recovery that is going on across the country, which again is in spurts. It's not full blown by any means, but to the extent that we've had a recovery from pre-pandemic levels, the article in Washington Post, again, I would recommend everybody take a look at it, shows that if you have a college degree, you are recovering fairly well from this pandemic, from the impact of the pandemic. If you are just a high school graduate, you're not. But even if you have a college degree and you happen to be a Black female or a Black male, you are not recovering well from this pandemic, according to the data. That is something we have to be aware of. And from a policy perspective here at this agency, we have to be thinking about that. And in our role of ensuring the efficient use of state resources, we have to make sure that decision makers at the state capitol, for example, are aware of these particular disparities and what we can do to close some of these gaps. Now, on this slide also, again, it shows that for the 18 to 21-year-old demographic, we expected to see an increase historically, and we got a pretty significant decrease of perhaps about 9% or so, maybe a little bit more than that. And this is likely due to the decline in enrollment for dual credit programs. And that's what this next slide talks about. Actual versus expected change for dual credit programs. Again, in blue, what we historically expected based upon enrollment trends. And what we're seeing, academic year 2019 to academic year 2020, the certified data shows a very stark picture of decline in dual credit programs across the state. Lots of reasons for that. Happy to hear any discussion about that when we get to some discussion and Q&A. Obviously, I think for many students, the sudden switch to remote learning was very difficult from a technology perspective. From a broadband access perspective, it continues to be a challenge for many students across the state, particularly in our rural parts of the state. Again, these are public policy issues that as an agency we need to be aware of and highlight as we are talking with and informing members of the legislature in their decision-making capacity. All right, we're going to talk very quickly and switch to some larger trends, demographic trends with regard to recent census numbers for the state of Texas. With regard to population changes. And these, again, are numbers that I'm pretty sure you're familiar with and have seen, but I think, again, are worth highlighting and talking about. And from an agency perspective, we need to be aware of these trends and these numbers so that we can help you all plan for the future. Here in this slide, you'll see that between 2010 and 2020, the Texas population grew by nearly 16%. This is more than any other state in the country. California remains a larger state than Texas just in terms of sheer numbers, but our growth here in this state, in Texas, in the last 10 years was well more than twice that of the growth that California saw in that same 10-year period. It's also important to note that these changes only reflect what the census data showed us when it was officially released last year. It doesn't necessarily show us what has occurred in the time that these numbers came out and the continued growth that our state is seeing over the past year or so. So that nearly 16% growth may actually be even higher now and just not reflected in these particular numbers. This next slide shows you demographic shifts from 2010 to 2020. The inner circle reflects the demographic breakdown of the state in 2010. The outer circle shows you how that is different in 2020. And as you can see, the Hispanic population on the left-hand side was at 37.6% in 2010, according to the official census. In 2020, that population has grown to 39.3% of the total state population here in Texas. I'm not going to go through all the demographic shifts, but this slide pretty much tells the picture on the demographic changes for the state in that 10-year period. And again, this slide, this PowerPoint, by the way, We've given it to Richard. We're fine with anybody that wants a copy of it. Feel free to just, Richard may make it available someplace, or Richard, if you get asked for it, we are fine with it being distributed. This next slide here it shows that the population growth, obviously, and again, I think everybody's aware of this, but sometimes it's important just to put it on a slide and take a look at it. The population changes from 2010 to 2020 here in the state were not very even. The key in this slide is the upper left-hand corner. It helps to tell the story of the population's change here in the state. Even though our population grew by 16%, our rural communities across the state are shrinking. So everywhere on this slide where you see green means the population count fell between 2010 and 2020. A lot of these changes are due in part to migration to and within the state, also to natural decreases. Some counties where the number of deaths is greater than the number of births, but it tells a very important picture. Overall, 86 counties had a natural decrease over the decade. More than half, 134 counties, had net out domestic migration. And there was also change, of course, across these counties by race and ethnicity. So of the 254 counties in Texas, 78% had lower counts of non-Hispanic whites in 2020 compared to 2010. 62% of counties also had lower counts of non-Hispanic Blacks from 2010 to 2020. Again, some important insights that come out of taking a look at this disaggregated information from the census. So this next slide is a population pyramid, also known as an age-sex pyramid. And the population, usually a healthy sort of population pyramid would look like a pyramid, but this actually reflects more like what the country looks like. So Texas looks more like what the country looks like. It's more of a stack than it is sort of a stable pyramid. So the group known as Millennials is the largest generation at present, and they make up the lion's share of your enrollments. But also, as we see, Gen Z and Gen Alpha are coming up very quickly. I'm the father of a 20-year-old college student myself and a 17-year-old high school senior, somewhat familiar with the Gen Z generation, I guess, if you could say. We know from articles and from some of the data that we've seen and studies that have been done that there are certain things about Gen Z that from a higher ed perspective, we ought to be thinking about. Gen Z students or Gen Z individuals tend to flock towards, for example, interest in climate science and environmentalism, for example. Things like that we ought to take note of as we're thinking about degree programs and the future of our institutions. According to the Pew Research data that we've seen, Gen Z was on track to become the most educated generation before the pandemic. Hopefully that stays on track. They have higher high school graduation rates, lower dropout rates than generations that came before them. And so we're going to continue to track this data and make sure that we stay on top of this as we plan for our higher ed future. This next slide is, and again, I think all data that probably you all have seen or are familiar with, the projections of high school graduates over the next 15 years. This is our student pipeline for the next 2 decades. And as you can see from this particular slide, we are seeing in Texas growth of high school graduates compared to other states. And that has implications, which I'm sure probably many of us are feeling already. The increased competition that's coming from different parts of the state, particularly the Midwest and the Northeast, for students in Texas and in states to the west of us who are seeing similar increases in high school graduates and sort of equivalent decreases in high school graduates in these other parts of the country. And then this next slide shows the same information, but just in a little bit more detail, where it shows you the states with an arrow up are states that are seeing an increase in high school graduates, and then those where there's not an increase are significant. And many of those that are seeing a decrease in high school graduates are the states that surround the state of Texas. So already intense competition is occurring for students out of our high schools. Dakota, before I finish out this segment, is there anything that you'd want to add to any of this data that we presented or that I presented?
Yeah, sure. I'll just add, in a previous life, I was the chief enrollment officer at 2 institutions, one being in the state of Arkansas, one being in the state of West Virginia. And as you can see with this map, both of those states were experiencing a decline in high school graduates. And so I would typically deploy recruiters to camp out in the state of Texas for months at a time to try to steal those high school graduates, obviously, to come to my institution in a different state. Of course, it kind of backfired now that I'm working in the state of Texas and I'm trying to do the exact opposite. But there's a lot of enrollment practitioners like me, to Ray's point, particularly in our neighboring states of Oklahoma, Arkansas, and Louisiana, who are coming to the state of Texas, going to the Valley, trying to recruit those students because they're seeing a dearth in their own high school graduation. And so that's something to be aware of, obviously, something to talk with your enrollment officers about as well. And perhaps your institution has a strategic enrollment management plan that contemplates how you all can take advantage of the growth that Texas is experiencing with its high school population.
Thank you, Dakota. The final slide on the population changes, then we're going to shift over to talking about some specific things that our agency is doing, is our takeaways. And I've highlighted a few things that stand out, but it's pretty much a recap of what we just touched upon in the previous 4 or 5 slides. Between 2010 and 2020, the Texas population grew more than any other state in the country. The percent of Hispanics in our state is near parity to non-Hispanic whites. Our growth in the state population was fueled by persons of color, particularly the Hispanic community. And then finally, Texas is one of 13 states that will experience an increase in high school graduates in the next 15 years. That has serious implications for us. And as Dakota says, we need to plan strategically for that. You know, what's not up here as well, I'll just say before we switch to our agency initiatives, I think many of you are familiar that we've been tracking here at the agency the progress of 8th grade cohorts for many years now, and college attainment for our 8th grade cohorts for those that attend our public K through 12 institutions. And typically an 8th grade cohort across the state has about 330,000 students across the state that are 8th graders. And we've been tracking progress. And what we see is that typically about 23 out of 100, if you condense that 330,000 down to 100 students that reflect the full demographics of the whole, what you'd see out of that 100 is that maybe 23 go on to start college. Actually, that's not true. A larger number go on to start college. About 23 actually complete college out of that 100. For a typical 8th grade cohort here in the state of Texas, about 23 will actually complete a degree or a certificate of some kind, so a college credential. But if you disaggregate that even further, what you'll find is that if you're an African-American male or female, if you're a Hispanic male in particular, those numbers are way below 23. Those numbers are down into the 10 or 11, maybe 14 or 15 out of every 100 in those particular underserved student populations. And that data is in our almanac. There's a whole page devoted to that particular data. We need to be aware of this. And we need to be mindful of what the demographics and the trends in state population mean for what we ought to be doing as higher education faculty members, in your case, as higher education public policy professionals, in the case of myself and Dakota. Okay, Dakota, I think I'm going to switch over then to our 60 by 30 TX refresh and maybe hand it over to you, Dakota, to say a few words about the next couple of slides. Dakota.
Thank you, Ray. So, job market in our country has changed over the last few years, last few decades. And I think that we all can agree that higher education is more important now than ever. And in order for a lot of our citizens to realize a livable wage paying job, we know that they're going to need to complete higher education in some form or fashion. In the state of Texas, we are improving our college completion rates, but not quickly enough. Ray just alluded to the fact that around 23% or 23 of every 100 students who are in the 8th grade complete college within about a 10-year time frame. This is way below what the state needs. According to the experts, 60% of Texans will need a certificate or degree within the state in order for our particular state to stay competitive in the global economy. And again, right now, not nearly enough of Texas students are completing the levels of education that are needed to fill the jobs that will be available. And so with this, about 6 years ago, 2015, we launched the 60 by 30 Texas plan, which was a effort to implement a clear and bold vision, which is what's to simply become the highest achievement state in the country, right? If you were to go and look at every state higher education attainment plan, you would not find a state that was more ambitious really than Texas in saying that by the year 2030, 60% of the citizens between the age 25 and 34 would have some form of post-secondary credential in terms of a degree or a certificate. And so within that particular 60 by 30 plan, we had 4 goals. First goal, again, the educated population goal, which was that by the year 2030, 60% of the Texas population between the age 25 and 34 would have a certificate or degree. The second goal was in the year 2030, in that specific year, we would award 550,000 certificates, associate degrees, bachelor degrees, or master degrees from an institution of higher education in Texas. So in that particular year, 2030. The third goal was a marketable skills goal that by 2030, all graduates from a Texas public institution of higher education will have completed a program with identified marketable skills, which again ties back into the job market. When I graduated college in 2008 with a biochemistry degree, a lot of the industry was saying, hey, we don't have students or enough students with the marketable skills. What they mean by that is we have enough biochemistry students who know the, quadratic formula or how to balance an equation or how to run the IR machine, but we don't have enough biochemistry students with skills and teamwork and communication and strategic planning and things of that nature, right? And so we want to make sure that institutions had identifiable marketable skills rooted in every academic program. And then the last goal was a student debt maintenance goal that contemplated by 2030, undergraduate student loan debt will not exceed 60% of the first year wages for graduates of Texas public institutions. So a quick example would be a student who graduated and was earning $50,000 their first year. Their overall student debt would not be over $30,000. And so those were the 4 goals of our original 60 by 30 plan. Now, as you all can imagine, we have been operating under that plan for the last 5 or 6 years. And we all understand that a lot of things that has happened in the higher education in the last 5 or 6 years, within the job market, within the labor economy as well. And we understand that there's a need to refresh, recalibrate some of the goals that we already had to ensure economic prosperity. And so what you see here before you is sort of a tweak on those particular 4 goals. The first goal is to leverage and accelerate innovation to drive research, commercialization, and economic development. The challenge from COVID, of course, the only way we were going to get out of this, and we're still in the thick of it, obviously, but one of the ways that we're going to continue to get it from under the pandemic is to be innovative and to rely on our researchers and scientists to ensure that they're doing things that's going to make our citizens safe. And of course, all of that work starts a lot of time at universities and colleges as well. And so we definitely want to make sure that we are prioritizing research and data and technology amongst our institutions so that we can be a leader in research and development. The second goal was really to expand our focus beyond the adult learners, right? What I told you all, the overarching goal was for 25 to 34-year-olds. We have a large and diverse working economy that we definitely want to pay attention to. So students, before they reach the age of 25, we want to capture them in our attainment goal, and certainly students beyond the age of 34. We have a program that we're going to talk a little bit about later, a reskilling grant program. Many of the students who have stopped out, who are coming back to higher education, are actually older than the age of 34. And we definitely want to capture their educational experiences within our attainment goal as well. The third goal is to prioritize high value credentials to align with the workforce needs. So we don't want to just say, go out and get any degree. We want to make sure that these particular degrees are going to be able to provide a livable wage paying jobs for our citizens, particularly in light, of course, of the cost of education and the desire for upward and social mobility. We want to ensure that our citizens are getting a compelling degree that's going to make them competitive in the workforce. And then lastly, we want to ensure that all Texans have equal access to tools and resources, and that's going to promote that educational attainment. Of course, if you look at the barriers and you look at communities that have been disproportionately impacted by COVID, we want to make sure that we are considering those particular communities and closing that equity gap.
Thank you, Dakota. I'm going to just jump in real quick, and then one thing to amplify is that the refresh effort has been going on for the past probably 6 or 8 months, although Commissioner Keller contemplated it even before he became commissioner, but certainly it's been a priority for him since he became commissioner a couple of years ago. And there's been engagement with external stakeholders, extensive amount of engagement. Hopefully your institutions have been touched because we've done regional meetings, we've done specific outreach to groups of institutions. We've touched non-higher ed stakeholders, employers and industry, for example, to get their input. So there is an ongoing effort to ensure that we have extensive stakeholder engagement before we present this refresh plan to our board for approval. And Dakota, I'm not sure if this is for our October board meeting or January. I don't remember if we queued it up for our October board meeting, but this will go before our board for approval at some point in the near future.
Yeah, every board meeting we have what we call a major policy discussion. The major policy discussion for October's board meeting, which is taking place on October 21st. So in about 2 weeks, the major policy discussion will actually be the 60 by 30 refresh.
Great. Okay, so we want to leave ample time for questions. We're going to move to an update on our gear funds. And what you see here on this slide are various initiatives, all here within the agency. We're not going to cover all of them. Those with the check mark on this slide are actually projects that are being worked on by the academic affairs and workforce education portion of the agency. And so I'm going to ask Dakota to touch on a couple of these, and then we've got 2 more slides that will take a deeper dive into the true capacity building grant program, and maybe one other of our grant programs that are specifically, I think, impactful towards our public 2-year sector across the state. But Dakota, anything in particular from this slide that you'd want to highlight from some of the projects that we're working on right now?
Yeah, sure. Just really quick for the GEAR funds, of course, we were, as a state agency, GEAR stands for Governor's Emergency Education Relief Funds. Last year in 2020, our agency received over $175 million in GEAR funds. Many of those funds was going into our student financial aid programs, Texas Grant, TEOG, and PEG. And then we use some as well for our digital learning work, for OER, and for our reskilling grants. Here we have a lot of programs that I get really excited about, so I don't want to get so excited that I take the rest of the time, because I definitely can, but I definitely want to highlight a couple programs. The first being the work-based learning program, which is our program to expand paid student internships and apprenticeships in the state. The second program is our reskilling support grants, which is really a completion grant for students who have institutional arrears at respective institutions. Of course, you know, a lot of times students have past due balances that prohibit them from enrolling either at their home institution or transferring because they can't get their official transcript in a different institution. And so that particular program is going to be a grant opportunity for institutions to apply for and then in turn award their students who have an institutional balance. The Leadership Scholarship Program is the brainchild of our commissioner. You know, we have a goal here in the state of Texas for 65% direct enrollment from high school to Texas institutions. Currently, we're at about 45%. And the interesting thing about that is many of the students who graduate in the top 10 and top quartile of their graduating class, of course, are automatically admitted into most of our Texas public institutions, but we're not finding them in higher education. And so this particular plan will allow for full academic scholarships for our high achieving students who come from low income backgrounds who matriculate to Texas public institutions, free of cost, essentially. The Student Success Consortium program is a research-based program where we're going to partner with some really compelling researchers and ensure that they're able to provide you all with best practices for student success, student matriculation, and student completion. The last thing I want to say about all of these particular programs is we really want to put the money in the hands of the institutions so that in turn you all can put those funds in the hands of our students. We understand that the last 18 months has been a major disruption for higher education. Many of our students have the aspiration for higher education, but they just don't have the support. These particular programs are things that's going to give them the support to be successful at your respective institutions.
And the only other thing I would add to that, thank you, that was really helpful, Dakota. The only thing I would add to that is, for example, our work-based learning initiative that Dakota touched upon. It is a $5 million initiative. We are finalizing the details of that. We expect to issue an RFA where most of this $5 million will be offered to our institutions, including, of course, our community colleges across the state and our TSTC campuses in the form of, we'll ask for applications. You tell us, here's an internship program we'd like to pull down some funds for because we want to convert it from unpaid to paid, for example, or we want to enhance and increase slots for a particular internship program. We want those types of applications. So that RFA is not in the field yet. We have not made that announcement yet, but it is imminent. In the next couple of weeks, please be on the lookout. For example, today we're dropping, if it hasn't dropped already, an announcement for a credentials program that we're about to do. That's a $12.5 million gear-funded initiative for embedding credentials in three areas, three specific areas: digital skills, data analytics, and frontline healthcare into credential and degree programs. And so we have a lot of initiatives that are coming out right now. The work-based learning one is imminent, so please be on the lookout for that one. And then our next slide here talks about the workforce education funds. Here, this is just to give you all a reminder. Dakota talked about the first batch of gear funds that our agency received, approximately $175 million last summer from the governor's office. Much of that went out in the form of replenishing, as Dakota said, our need-based financial aid programs, so TEG, TEOG, and Texas grants. But a lot of that money, $46.5 million to be exact, went out for a reskilling and upskilling program. And we've done rounds 1 and 2 of a reskilling and upskilling grant program. We have 62 institutions across the state who are currently grantees under this fund. We've distributed about $27.5 million of the $46.5 million to about 62 institutional grantees across the state. These are just our public 4- and 2-year institutions and our TSDC campuses. We're about to release round 3 of this reskilling program. That's coming in the next week or so. We'll do an announcement. There'll be a new RFA for round 3, and we're actually changing the eligibility requirements to make it a larger group of students who are eligible for funds under round 3, and we'll make those more flexible eligibility requirements. We're going to make them retroactive to rounds 1 and 2 as well. So we're trying to get this money out the door to as many students as possible. More information to come on those particular initiatives. Happy to answer questions about those. And then this last slide is the True Capacity Building Initiative. That's $25 million. We announced this RFA about 2.5 weeks ago. The deadline to apply was last Thursday. And we ended up with 48 applications from our public 2-year and TSTC and Lamar campuses across the state. So 48 applications were received, totaling about $27.8 million in requested funds. And the program is $25 million. So we actually got even more requested than we had available, but that's a good thing. We're going to try real hard to fund as many of those applications as possible. And this is for workforce ed capacity building programs. And we're happy to talk a little bit more about that in the Q&A. Dakota, before I switch to our final slide, anything further on any of our gear initiatives before we wrap this up?
We've been getting a lot of questions in the chat, and just know we won't be able to cover everything in our time here, but we'll have some contact information at the end of the PowerPoint. And you guys can feel free to send us an email, and if you want us to, present at your respective institutions or allow some of our colleagues to come and engage you all, we'll be more than happy to do so.
We're happy to do it. Thank you for saying that, Dakota. We really want to get out there and speak to your colleagues directly to the extent that you will have us do so. This slide here, before I do the last slide, we often get asked, we don't have updated info yet on our organizational charts, as we've done some restructuring here at the agency under Commissioner Keller's leadership over the past 2 years. So what I did is we put a slide together just so that you know, these are the 4 divisions that comprise academic affairs and workforce education. There's about 300 employees that work here at the coordinating board. About 80 of those employees are within these 4 divisions that comprise what we call academic affairs and workforce education. Many of you know Stacy Silverman, our longtime now Assistant Commissioner for Academic and Health Affairs. Any kind of new program approvals, degree program approvals, go through Stacy's shop. She's also overseeing transfer initiatives and a whole lot of other things. Jarrell Booker, many of you know, college readiness and success. A lot of work on college and career advising is happening right now under Jarrell's leadership and his team. Digital learning is one of our newest divisions. Dr. Michelle Singh, who we recruited a year ago from Texas A&M Corpus Christi, is our new Assistant Commissioner for Digital Learning. A lot of important and exciting work going on in that new division. And we also carved out workforce education and made it its own division. And Dr. Tina Jackson, who came to us from Collin College about 10 months ago, is our Assistant Commissioner for Workforce Education. Just wanted you all to know this is a snapshot of the folks that I get the privilege of working with every day here at the agency. And then lastly, I know that some of you wanted to hear or just wanted us to touch upon the Commission on Community College Finance. You got the wrong person on this presentation for this, because I'm actually not involved in the commission and the work of the commission. So there's not a whole lot more than I can say than what you probably already know. The governor recently named 4 members of the commission and selected, of course, Woody Hunt from El Paso, that many of us know, who was the chair of our 60 by 30 TX initiative, or co-chair for that several years ago, and very involved in higher ed. Woody Hunt will be chairing this Commission on Community College Finance. The remaining members of the commission have not been named, but as I understand it, it is imminent for us to get the names. I think the Lieutenant Governor and the Speaker have slots to fill in this particular commission. The first organizational meeting, is scheduled to occur next week. So I guess we are going to get some names pretty quickly, because that first meeting is supposed to happen. They're supposed to complete their work by November 2022, provide recommendations to the legislature in advance of the legislative session. Again, as Dakota has offered, we're happy to put you in touch with the folks that we work with here at the agency to get more information on either this commission, anything we presented in our slide deck today, or anything we haven't presented but that touches upon what you want to know more about. Please let us know. We freely give out our contact information, not just to email, but cell phone as well, because in this mobile environment, or in this remote environment that we're all still living in, sometimes the best way to reach someone is just to call me on my cell. So I've been happy to give that number out and happy to hear from all of you. Richard, I'll invite you to come back on the screen. I'm going to stop sharing because we've reached the point where we really would like to go through some of the questions and engage in some dialogue with you and your colleagues. And so I hope that was helpful and look forward to some discussion. Go ahead, Richard.
Great. Well, Ray, thanks so much. You packed a whole lot of information in just a few minutes. Thanks so much. You sent over the presentation. We put that in the chat so people can download it there. We'll also have a packet of information that we'll send out after the conference with all these materials. So if you don't download it now, you'll get a chance to get that later as well. A number of questions in the chat, and they were a lot of really good ones. One had to do with professional development in those funds that you were describing a minute ago. How much of that is devoted to professional development for faculty?
Yeah. I think we're the credentials RFA. So that RFA language has not come out yet, and we actually have debated this quite a bit internally. We want to be supportive of credentials. The post-pandemic world actually requires us to think not just in terms of a college degree, whether it's an associate's, bachelor's, or beyond, but even perhaps more importantly in terms of credentials. And also in that regard, with regard to professional development, Richard, we want to track right now. One of the things that that Commissioner Keller, I know he and I have had this conversation quite a bit. We don't track a lot of this information. Officially, all we track here at the agency are level 1 and level 2 certs on the workforce ed side. We don't track, for example, Occupational Skills Award, OSAs. We get some of that data voluntarily from institutions, but we don't officially track it. We've got to do better at tracking this data. We have visions to build a credentials repository that other states are taking the lead on. We want to try to do something similar here in Texas. So that's part of a separate initiative that Lori Fye, my colleague, is one of the other 3 deputy commissioners, is heading up that initiative. So the answer is, with regard to the RFA we're about to release on credentials, that are going to be focused in 3 areas. And again, digital skills, data analytics, and frontline healthcare. That's where we want to see the development of credentials, either standalone or embedded along certificate programs or degree programs. So the language will be pretty broad. We debated whether to define those three areas, for example, by zip codes, and we decided not to do that. We're going to leave it up to the field to say, here's what we want to do in these three broad areas. We think this is a strong application coordinating board. Give us some funding. Then we're going to leave it to our review teams, which typically we invite colleagues from the Texas Workforce Commission to sit in our review teams, which is what they're doing for the TRUE initiative. And we then have them make recommendations to the commissioner on funding. So more to come on that, Richard. We should probably continue that conversation, but it's on the radar screen. And I hope that's helpful.
Okay. Yeah. Well, and I think that's an important question because there's so much happening at our schools right now. And I think they really are, people are really stepping back and assessing what do we do? How do we do it? How do we think about the value of what we're giving our students? And so professional development for faculty and for administrators, for that matter, is going to be important because we need to be talking out loud in a concerted way. So if there is capacity in what y'all are providing for institutions to do that professional development, I think they're going to find that really useful. Got another question here on a state-based free community college. I know that's being discussed at the federal level. That's been on the radar for a while. This question, though, came in the context of what's happening in Dallas with Dallas Promise, which is more of a private and public-private initiative. Is there any talk at the state level about something like that?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of support for what we're seeing out of the Promise program in Dallas. I think Alamo colleges may have a similar type of program that they call something different. We're tracking all of that, Richard. I have not heard any talk during any of these special sessions about that. But obviously, the folks that are very involved, either Texas 2036 folks or Dallas Commit, that are all very involved in the Promise program in Dallas, I think certainly have strong voices and very well respected voices at the state capitol. So I wouldn't be surprised if there's momentum, perhaps during a regular legislative session towards greater support or maybe some sort of strategic statewide initiative. But right now, I haven't heard of anything in that regard.
Okay. Yeah. And I think that is going to take quite a bit of discussion. I've heard concerns, even the discussions at the federal level about how that would impact our colleges. There are certainly advantages and disadvantages, but it's important that we get something like that right. One quick question on a question about the 6-drop rule. Are there any provisions for students impacted by COVID to retake classes later, or any exceptions for drops just because of these, extenuating circumstances?
Yeah, we continue to talk about that. We have actually spent some time recently looking at our FAQ page for COVID because we did offer some flexibility in many different areas during the sort of the height of the pandemic. And obviously, students and our institutions are still struggling in many different ways. So we've had an internal group that has been meeting. We were doing almost daily meetings back at the height of COVID over the past 12 months. And we're trying to reassemble that group, Richard, to figure out what areas are there still need. We just got a question, for example, from an institution about one of our FAQs that they were asking for increased flexibility to do, I think, sort of remote learning with regard to one of our either education or nursing programs, the clinicals, and trying to get some flexibility there that I know we had offered last year. So that's one where I'll take that one back to our group, and let me follow up with you with some additional information on that one.
And one last thing is on someone asked about the percentage of sections taught online. There was obviously a huge move to online this last year, but even this fall, there's a lot of energy around that question right now. People really distressed. And what I'm hearing anecdotally is a lot of students saying, I'm not ready to go back on campus yet.
Right.
Do y'all collect that data, and what is that looking like?
We don't, to the best of my knowledge, we are not asking institutions to report into us like, what percentage are now back in person instruction versus continued remote or digital instruction. But I stand to be corrected. Dakota, I don't know if you know that or not, but I don't think we officially collect that information.
We don't ask for it, but according to our DAI office, since we received a question in the chat, I contacted the director of data there, and they told me that they do have that information. It's not required for institutions to submit it, so I don't know how thorough that particular data pool is. But she said that she does have the enrollment data regarding the teaching modalities at each institution. And of course, as you all could expect, more hybrid and online courses were offered in the last year. Again, this data reflects from 2019 to 2020, right? So we don't know what the 2021 data brings us, but in the fall 2020 and spring 2021, we saw an increase of online courses and hybrid courses, which I'm sure doesn't surprise any of us because of the pandemic.
That may be something we might be able to collect as well. That would be an interesting snapshot to see kind of how that shifted. We just got a question in the chat, which has to do with the TCCTA. We did an entire webinar with Suzanne Morales-Vale and her team on that. I'd really encourage people to go back to go to our YouTube channel, just do a search for TCCTA's channel, and you can find it in there. And I think get all the information that you're needing. But I think that does speak to a concern that I'm hearing a lot right now, having to do with learning loss, both at the K-12 level and at the college level. And I don't know how y'all are engaging with that question, but I think that's going to be something that going forward, we're really going to need to take a look at.
Couldn't agree more, Richard. Those are the types of issues that we as an agency in particular, I think have an obligation to make sure that we, think about the resources, whether it's the bully pulpit in our role as an advocate for higher ed with members of the legislature, or whether it is redeploying resources, financial or otherwise, to dealing with issues like that. I mean, we know that learning loss is real. We know that it impacts our institutions, in particular, I think your institutions, and we have to think about that. And so yeah, Suzanne Morales-Vale, I think, is known pretty well by your group. She and Jarrell Booker and I think a very good team there in our College Readiness and Success Division continue to stay focused on those issues. And quite frankly, it's something that Commissioner Keller is very focused on, just personally. So how that translates, I think you'll see hopefully some actions soon and continued actions from this agency. But it's something that we are certainly aware of. Absolutely. Yep.
Well, Suzanne has chaired our committees before when she was at Central Texas College, so a good friend of TCCTA, and we'll continue that conversation with her. Well, gentlemen, I want to thank you all again for your time today. This is really valuable information, and glad we're able to share this with our members. We want to be a channel between the work y'all are doing and the work our members are doing. So this is a good opportunity to do that. And I appreciate you being so open and generous with the information.
Richard, we're always happy to come before your group at any time. And you guys have been a friend. And Richard, I appreciate your ongoing support throughout the years, and look forward to strengthening our partnership in the months and years ahead. So look forward to it in our continued collaboration.
Thank you so much. And Dakota, very nice to meet you. I don't think we'd met before. I hope we get chances to work together again in the future.
Same. Very nice to meet you all. Thank you.